The sun hung low over the endless stretch of sand, turning the world into a golden mirror. The outpost sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dunes that looked the same in every direction. It was a quiet evening, the kind that made even the toughest soldiers feel strangely calm. The wind had settled, carrying only the faint hum of generators and the occasional sound of footsteps on gravel. Inside the camp, life moved in a slow rhythm. The soldiers cleaned their weapons, checked their radios, and shared light jokes as if trying to make the silence feel less heavy. They were part of an international peacekeeping force sent to watch over this region after a long conflict. The mission's purpose was to protect, rebuild, and make sure the peace they'd fought for didn't fall apart again. At the center of it all was their leader, the human commander. Nobody called him by his real name anymore. Commander was enough. He had that rare kind of presence that could calm a storm without saying a word. His voice was steady, his movements confident, and his smile, well, that smile had a power of its own. People said you could tell everything was under control when he smiled. He wasn't the loud type. He didn't yell orders or try to impress anyone. He just looked you in the eye and gave short, clear instructions. It was hard not to trust him. His team would follow him anywhere, even into the middle of a desert like this one, where life felt like a waiting game between heat and silence. That evening, the commander stood near the edge of the camp looking out over the empty horizon. He always did that before sunset, as if checking whether the world beyond the dunes still existed. One of his men approached him holding a small device, a portable scanner that was acting strangely. The signal lights were blinking in a pattern nobody recognized. "Sir, the sensors picked up something odd about 20 kilometers north. It might be interference, but it's not the usual kind." The commander took the device and studied it quietly. For a few seconds, he said nothing. The wind shifted, brushing sand across his boots. Then with a small grin, he handed it back. Probably just a weather glitch. This place plays tricks on electronics. His grin was meant to ease the tension. It always worked. The man nodded, visibly more relaxed, and went back to his post. The commander stayed there a while longer, watching the desert fade into twilight. His expression was calm, but something in his eyes hinted at thought. Deep, careful thought. Inside the command tent, the rest of the team went through their nightly routine. The medics prepared reports, the engineers double-checked the vehicles, and a few soldiers gathered around a portable heater, trading stories from home. It was an ordinary night in every way. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through, broken, unclear, like someone whispering through layers of static. Nobody could understand the words, but the tone was urgent. The message lasted only a few seconds before the radio went dead. The room fell silent. One of the technicians tried adjusting the signal, tapping the side of the radio. "Could be atmospheric noise," he said, though he didn't sound sure. The commander entered a moment later, his boots crunching softly against the sand floor. "Report." They told him about the strange broadcast. He listened carefully, his arms crossed, eyes steady. Then he asked, "Did you catch any coordinates?" "Not clear, sir. Just some numbers, maybe, but they cut off halfway." "Write down what you have," he said calmly. "We'll check it in the morning." The soldiers expected him to worry or at least show concern, but instead he smiled that familiar, reassuring grin. It told them not to overthink it. It told them everything was fine. So they relaxed again, because when the commander smiled, that meant they could breathe. Later that night, the camp settled into stillness. The lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the perimeter lamps and the whisper of wind against the tents. The commander sat alone in his small quarters, looking at a map spread out before him. The numbers from the half-broken message were scribbled in the corner. He traced a finger over them, matching them to locations. When the pattern formed, he leaned back and stared at it, silent for a long time. Something about those coordinates didn't fit. They pointed to a narrow valley about a day's drive away, a place not marked on any official map. He had heard locals talk about that area once. They called it the Valley of Echoes. Most of the locals avoided it. They said strange sounds came from there after sunset, sounds that didn't belong to any man or machine. He looked at the map again, eyes narrowing slightly. Then, almost unconsciously, that small grin appeared on his face, the same one everyone trusted. The next morning began like any other. The team gathered for breakfast, joking about the endless sand and how their coffee always tasted like dust. The engineers prepared the vehicles for a patrol run, and the medics checked their gear. Everything felt routine, almost peaceful. Then the commander entered the main tent with a folded paper in hand. His tone was calm as ever, but his words made everyone straighten in their seats. "We've got something to look into," he said. "Coordinates came through last night. Could be nothing, could be something. We'll move out at dawn tomorrow to check it." There was a pause. A few soldiers exchanged looks. One of them spoke up. "Sir, is this confirmed intel? Could it be a false signal?" The commander gave that same easy smile. "Maybe, but that's why we check. We'll go in, take a quick look, and come back before sunset. No heroics." That grin erased the doubt in their minds. If he was confident, they would be too. The rest of the day passed in quiet preparation. The vehicles were fueled, supplies loaded, and weapons checked twice over. Still, a thin thread of unease wove through the air, one nobody spoke aloud. Even the birds seemed to have left the area, leaving behind only the faint whistle of wind through the fences. That evening, as the sky turned from orange to deep violet, one of the younger soldiers found himself staring at the commander from a distance. The man stood alone again, looking toward the horizon with the same thoughtful expression he always wore before a big decision. The young soldier couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and uncertainty. The commander looked so sure of everything, so calm, even when the world around them felt unpredictable. Yet there was something in his grin that night, something that didn't feel the same. It wasn't the light, playful smile they all knew. It was quieter, thinner, almost secretive. The soldier brushed the thought away. Maybe he was just tired. Everyone was night deepened. The desert sky filled with stars, so many that it almost didn't seem real. The wind whispered across the dunes, carrying a faint hum as if the earth itself was breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a radio flickered to life for just a second, then went silent again. The commander lay on his cot, unable to sleep. His mind replayed the strange signal and the numbers that matched too perfectly to be random. Something about this felt different from every mission before. He didn't tell the team that a faint second transmission had come through while they slept. A whisper in a language he didn't recognize, followed by the same coordinates repeated once more. He smiled to himself in the dark, though there was no one to see it. That grin, the one his men trusted, lingered like a shadow across his face. By sunrise, the camp was alive again. Engines roared softly as the convoy lined up, dust swirling behind them. The commander climbed into the lead vehicle and looked at his team. "Let's go see what's out there," he said. The men cheered lightly, their spirits high, believing it would be another simple mission. Just another day under the desert sun. As the vehicles rolled out, leaving tracks that the wind would soon erase, the commander's gaze stayed fixed on the far horizon. His reflection in the windshield showed that same small grin again, confident, steady, and unknowingly dangerous. That was the moment it all began to change, though no one yet understood how. The world still looked peaceful, the sky still bright, the desert still quiet. But behind that grin, fate had already started moving in a direction none of them could turn back from. Everything still seemed fine for now. The commander smiled, the team trusted, and the desert. The sun rose slow and wide across the desert sky, spreading light like liquid fire over the dunes. The air shimmered with heat, though the day had barely begun. The soldiers moved quickly, loading the last of their supplies into the vehicles. Metal clanked, tires crunched against sand, and engines coughed to life one after another. The commander walked among them quietly, inspecting every detail. His boots left shallow prints in the dust, and his eyes were sharp, calm, unreadable. He checked the fuel drums, water containers, and radios himself before finally stepping back. "We move in 10 minutes, he said, his tone steady as stone. The team nodded without hesitation. They had done dozens of missions like this one, and his voice always carried a sense of safety. It didn't matter where they were going. When he spoke, the fear faded. Still, a faint unease drifted through the air like invisible smoke. No one wanted to admit it, but something about this assignment felt strange. The coordinates they were following didn't match any known maps. Even the local guides they'd spoken to earlier had warned them about that area, calling it empty land that whispers. The commander stood at the front of the convoy, staring out over the endless dunes. His expression was serious, but a small grin played on his face, like someone who already knew what waited out there. It was a confident grin, maybe too confident. The engines roared as the vehicles began their slow march into the desert, sand sprayed from the tires shimmering under the sunlight. The men in the back joked quietly to pass the time. Someone said they'd find nothing but rocks and bones out there. Another replied that at least bones didn't shoot back. The laughter eased the tension for a moment. Hours passed. The heat grew heavier, the air drier. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, swallowing sound and thought alike. The radio remained silent except for the occasional crackle of static. Around noon, they stopped for a short break near a cluster of jagged rocks. The men set up shade cloths and drank warm water from their canteens. The commander unfolded the map again, tracing the path with his finger. The second in command sat beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Sir," he said quietly, "we're heading into an unmarked zone. If something goes wrong, no one will find us quickly." The commander looked up, still calm. "You worry too much," he said with a faint grin. "We'll be in and out before you know it." That grin should have been comforting. It usually was. But today it carried a strange edge, like a man smiling not because he was sure, but because he didn't want anyone to see his doubt. By afternoon, they reached the first sign of change. The sand began to harden under the tires, the ground shifting from soft dunes to rocky soil. The wind grew colder, whispering low and steady through the stones. Even the sunlight seemed different here, paler, more watchful. One of the soldiers pointed ahead. "Sir, look there." At the far end of the valley, a faint shimmer moved against the horizon. It wasn't the sun or a mirage. It looked like movement, but too distant to identify. The commander raised his binoculars, scanning the area. After a few seconds, he lowered them and said, "Could be wreckage. We'll check it out." No one argued. They trusted him even when they didn't understand. As the convoy moved deeper into the valley, the air grew eerily still. The sound of engines echoed off the stone walls in strange patterns, bouncing back like ghostly replies. The valley seemed to narrow the further they went, its cliffs rising high on both sides. The team's usual chatter faded away. Then, without warning, the first radio signal broke through. It was faint, just a few seconds of sound, but it wasn't static this time. It was a voice, low and fast, speaking words no one could recognize. The radio operator turned to the commander, confused. "Sir, it's not one of ours. It's not even our frequency." The commander frowned slightly. "Record it," he said. "We'll analyze it later." They continued driving until they reached the place marked on the map. What they found there was nothing like what they expected. A cluster of abandoned vehicles stood half buried in the sand. Some were military trucks, others civilian. Their paint had faded and their tires were worn to the rim, but they weren't ancient. Someone had been here not too long ago. The soldiers spread out cautiously. Dust swirled around their boots. The medic checked one of the trucks, noticing that the fuel lines had been deliberately cut. The engineer examined another and found its engine still warm under the hood. "Someone left fast," he muttered. The commander walked slowly through the line of vehicles, his eyes sharp and curious. He touched the side of one truck, running his hand over a streak of sand-polished metal. Then, without looking back, he said quietly, "Stay alert. Something doesn't feel right." They found no signs of bodies, no footprints, no belongings, just silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made you aware of every heartbeat. One of the soldiers crouched down, squinting at something glinting near the tire of a truck. "Sir, there's a wire here." He didn't get to finish. The explosion came so fast that no one even heard it at first. Just a flash of light, a punch of heat, and the sound of metal tearing through air. The ground shook, throwing men off their feet. Sand filled the sky like smoke. For a few long seconds, no one could see anything. Just ringing ears, dust, and the smell of burning oil. The commander was the first to move. He dragged two soldiers out from under a collapsed canopy, coughing through the smoke. His face was covered in dust, a thin line of blood across his forehead. Yet somehow he smiled. "Everyone stay down. We'll regroup in the clear zone." That grin again, firm, steady, almost defiant. The men scrambled to their feet, pulling the injured to cover. Another explosion followed, smaller but closer. Someone shouted for the medic. The radio crackled again, this time with pure noise. The valley walls amplified the chaos until it sounded like the earth itself was howling. When the smoke finally began to thin, 3 vehicles were gone, burned to metal skeletons. 2 men were wounded badly but alive. The rest were shaken, covered in dust and disbelief. The commander stood in the middle of it all, staring at the wreckage. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with grime, but his expression remained calm. "We hold position here until we get our bearings," he said. "No one moves alone." The second in command approached him quietly. "Sir, this was a trap." The commander nodded. "I know." There was something in his tone, acceptance, not surprise. He looked up at the cliffs surrounding them. Whoever set this up knew we'd come. The younger soldier who had noticed his grin the night before now watched him again. The commander's face was steady, but that grin appeared once more, thin and deliberate. "We'll find out who they are," he said softly, "and why they wanted us here." The words should have sounded reassuring. Instead, they carried a strange chill, like a promise no one wanted kept. By nightfall, they had set up a temporary camp near the valley wall. Fires burned low, giving off thin trails of smoke. The medic worked silently over the wounded, while the rest took turns keeping watch. No one spoke much. The desert around them felt alive, whispering with sounds too faint to place. The commander sat apart from the others, staring at the dark line of the horizon. The glow from the fires flickered over his face, catching the faint curve of that same grin again. He didn't look afraid. He looked like someone who had seen this coming all along. The second in command finally walked over and sat beside him. "We should call for extraction," he said. "We've lost vehicles and the valley isn't safe." The commander didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed fixed on the distance. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "If we leave now, we'll never know who sent that signal." The other man frowned. "With respect, sir, that's not our mission." The commander turned to him then, eyes calm, voice steady. "Our mission is to keep people safe. Whoever lured us here, if they have the power to do this, then others are in danger too." His tone left no room for argument. The second in command sighed quietly, knowing the discussion was over. Later that night, as the desert cooled and the stars returned, the commander stood alone again, the faintest grin on his lips. His shadow stretched long across the sand, silent and watchful. The others slept lightly, unaware that far above them on the cliffs, tiny flickers of movement appeared, small lights blinking on and off in the dark. They weren't stars. Somewhere in that cold silence, the same faint radio signal returned, whispering. The night was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The air carried a strange heaviness, the kind that makes every small sound feel louder than it should. The campfire flickered weakly in the middle of the small circle of tents, and the men sat close to it, staring into the flames. No one spoke much after what had happened earlier. The valley around them looked calm from a distance, but it held a silence that didn't feel natural. The commander sat a little away from the others, staring at the burned-out vehicles that still smoked faintly in the distance. His face was half-lit by the fire, and his eyes looked sharper than ever. Every few minutes he glanced toward the dark cliffs as if expecting something to move up there. The second in command approached quietly, handing him a tin cup filled with lukewarm coffee. "You haven't eaten, sir," he said softly. The commander took the cup but didn't drink. His eyes remained on the horizon. "Do you hear that?" he asked. The man frowned, listening. All he could hear was the crackle of fire and the wind shifting the sand. "Hear what?" "That hum," the commander murmured. "It comes and goes, almost like breathing." The man listened again, but there was only silence. He decided not to press the matter. The commander had a habit of noticing things others didn't. Sounds, shadows, patterns. Sometimes it saved them. Sometimes it scared them. The hours passed slowly. One by one, the men drifted into uneasy sleep, leaving only two on watch. The commander stayed awake, his mind turning over every detail of the explosion. The placement of the vehicles, the timing, the signal that had led them there. None of it was random. Just before dawn, the wind changed again. It came down the valley with a low moan, sweeping through the rocks like a voice whispering secrets. The commander stood and walked a few steps away from the camp, squinting into the distance. The stars were fading now, and a faint light began to touch the cliffs. That was when he saw it. Far away, near the northern ridge, a small flicker of light moved. Once, then twice, like someone signaling with a mirror. He stared for a long moment, then turned back to camp. "Get everyone up," he said quietly. "We're not alone here." Within minutes, the camp was alive again. Men grabbed rifles, checked ammo, and scanned the valley. The medic helped the injured prepare to move. No one asked questions. They had learned by now that when the commander gave an order, it was for a reason. The second in command joined him near the lead vehicle. "Do we know who it is?" The commander shook his head. "No, but whoever set the trap didn't leave. They're still here watching." They formed a tight convoy and began moving slowly through the valley floor. The ground was rough and every sound echoed off the cliffs. Drones were launched to scout ahead, but within minutes the feeds started cutting out one by one. Static filled the screens until they went black. The engineer cursed under his breath. "Signal interference again. It's like the air itself is blocking transmission." The commander didn't reply. His eyes followed the narrowing walls of the valley as the shadows stretched across the sand. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The air, once dry and burning, now carried a damp chill that didn't belong in the desert. After an hour of slow movement, the lead vehicle came to a sudden halt. "Something ahead," the driver said. The commander climbed out and walked forward. In front of them stood a half-buried structure, concrete walls, rusted metal doors, and a faded symbol that none of them recognized. It looked like a bunker, old but not ancient. The sand had covered most of it, but a narrow path led down toward a broken entrance. "This isn't on any map," the second in command said quietly. "No," the commander replied, staring at the structure. "That's exactly why it's important." He ordered 2 men to stay with the vehicles while the rest followed him inside. The entrance groaned as they pushed through, and the air inside was thick with dust and the smell of rusted iron. Their flashlights cut through the dark, revealing old machinery, cables, and walls covered in strange markings. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The sound of their boots echoed endlessly, as if the space beneath the earth stretched farther than it should have. Then, without warning, a light flickered at the far end of the tunnel, dim and bluish, like a pulse. The medic whispered, "Sir, someone's been here recently." The commander raised a hand for silence and kept moving forward. The others followed, their footsteps slow and cautious. When they reached the end of the tunnel, they found a small room filled with old communication equipment. Most of it was broken or covered in dust, but one terminal still blinked faintly with power. The commander wiped the screen with his glove and looked closer. Lines of code ran across it, repeating over and over, coordinates the same ones they had received from the strange signal. The second in command stepped closer. "What is this place?" The commander didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the screen. Slowly, that grin appeared again, the one that always meant he'd found something important. "Someone's been transmitting from here," he said. "They wanted us to find it. Why us? That's what we'll find out." He reached for the controls, trying to access the data. The screen flashed once, then went dark. A soft click sounded behind them. The soldier guarding the door turned, flashlight shaking slightly. "Sir, did you hear that?" A faint metallic clang echoed through the corridor. Then another, like footsteps. The commander turned off his flashlight, motioning for the others to do the same. Darkness swallowed them, thick and heavy. They stood completely still, listening. For several seconds there was nothing. Then from the direction they had come, came the unmistakable sound of movement. Slow, deliberate, scraping against the floor. The medic whispered, trembling. "Someone's down here." The commander spoke softly, his voice calm. Back to the entrance, quietly. They moved in near silence, flashlights still off. The air felt colder now, almost freezing. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. When they finally reached the surface, sunlight hit them like a blessing. The men exhaled in relief, eyes wide, breathing hard. They turned to look back at the bunker, its dark entrance yawning like the mouth of the earth itself. "Seal it," the commander said. "We're done here." The engineer used one of the remaining charges to collapse the entrance. The blast echoed through the valley, scattering birds from the cliffs. For a moment, it felt like they had ended something. But as the dust settled, the radio in the commander's hand crackled again. A voice spoke, faint but clear this time. "Why did you close the door?" Everyone froze. The channel wasn't one of theirs. The commander stared at the radio, silent. Then slowly that same grin returned. "Because we weren't invited," he said softly. Then he turned it off. The men packed quickly and moved out of the valley. The commander didn't look back once, though the others did. They swore they saw movement among the rocks, shadows shifting in ways that didn't match the wind. By evening, they reached open ground again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep gold and red. The mood was strange, relief mixed with confusion. Nobody understood what they had just walked into. As they set up a new camp away from the valley, the second in command approached the commander again. "Sir, we need to report this." "Whatever that place was, it wasn't abandoned." "I know," the commander said. His voice was calm, his gaze distant. "Then what do you want us to tell them?" The commander looked up at the sky, the last of the light fading from his face. "Tell them nothing for now. Not until we know who's really listening." The men didn't argue. They had learned long ago that when the commander made a choice, it wasn't without reason. Yet deep inside, unease grew among them. The valley had left something behind in all of them, an echo they couldn't shake off. That night, as they tried to sleep, the wind rose again. It howled through the desert like a voice calling their names. Radios flickered to life without being touched, playing faint whispers that stopped whenever someone got close. The commander stood alone outside his tent, his back to the fire, staring toward the dark shape of the valley in the distance. His hand rested on the radio. He didn't look afraid. Slowly, that same grin crossed his face again, the grin that had started it all. He whispered to himself, "Now I understand." No one heard him. The night swallowed his words, carrying them back toward the valley. Somewhere in the dark, a single answering signal blinked, on and off like an eye watching. The desert was silent again, but the quiet no longer felt like peace. It felt like a pause, one that could end at any moment. The commander turned back toward the camp. The faint The wind outside the base howled like a restless spirit that refused to be quiet. The camp lights flickered under the dark, cloudy sky, and the soldiers moved about quietly, their eyes filled with the same tiredness that had been building up for days. Inside the command tent, the air was tense. The human commander stood near the central table, staring at a map that had been marked so many times it almost looked like a piece of abstract art. His face carried that same calm expression everyone had learned to trust, but that calm had now started to make people uneasy. The others whispered quietly among themselves. They had followed him through every impossible situation, through storms, hunger, and fear. He always smiled before every plan, as if he knew the outcome before it happened. That smile once gave them courage. Now it made them nervous. The last time he smiled like that, something had gone terribly wrong. The night before, they had tried to take back the ridge from their enemies. It was supposed to be a simple mission. The commander had laid out the plan, confident and steady as ever. "They won't see us coming," he had said, his lips curling into that same small grin that everyone recognized. They had believed him. They always did. But when the team reached the ridge, the enemy had already been waiting for them. Someone had leaked their position, or worse, someone on the inside had been feeding the enemy their plans. The commander didn't show anger when they came back with losses. He simply sat down on a crate, stared at the fire, and said quietly, "We'll fix it." That was all. No shouting, no blaming, no explanations. Just those 3 words. It was as if the disaster didn't even surprise him. Now, as dawn crept over the mountains, the air smelled of cold metal and smoke. The commander called his officers to gather. His voice was calm, but there was something strange in it, something the others couldn't name. "We are changing direction," he said, tapping the map. "No more attacks on the ridge. We'll move south through the forest. There's an old facility there. We'll use it as our base." Everyone stared at him. The forest was thick, dangerous, and full of things none of them wanted to face. Wild terrain, unpredictable storms, and possibly enemy scouts. It was also far from their supply line. It made no sense. One of the officers, a woman with a tired face and dirt smudged across her cheek, finally spoke. "Sir, we don't have enough fuel or rations for that route. We'll be cut off." The commander looked up. "We won't need supplies for long," he said softly. "We'll find what we need there." No one knew what he meant by that. He turned back to the map, drawing lines with his gloved finger as if he could already see the path unfolding before him. The soldiers followed orders, though uneasy. As they packed their things, quiet conversations spread among the ranks. Some said the commander had gone too far. Others whispered that he had a plan no one else could understand. The uncertainty hung over them like a fog. By afternoon, they were on the move. The forest grew darker as they entered it. the trees closing in like silent watchers. The sound of boots crunching on the leaves was the only rhythm that kept them steady. The commander walked at the front, his eyes fixed ahead. At one point, one of the younger soldiers caught up to him and asked softly, "Sir, why are we going this way?" The commander didn't stop walking. He simply said, "Because this is where the truth waits." The young soldier didn't understand but didn't dare ask again. As the night fell, they reached the old facility he had spoken of. It was half buried in vines, broken windows staring like dark eyes, and the metal walls were covered in rust. It looked abandoned for years, yet something about it felt alive, as if the place itself had been waiting for them. The commander ordered a few men to check the interior. When they returned, their faces were pale. "Sir," one of them said, "there are signs of recent activity. Someone's been here." The commander nodded, not surprised. "Good," he said. "Then we're not too late." "Not too late for what?" No one asked. They set up a small base inside. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the broken windows. The commander stood near the control panels inside the facility, brushing off layers of dust. He seemed to know exactly where to look, as if he had been here before. He pressed a few buttons and faint lights flickered across the room. Everyone stared. "Sir, how do you know this place?" someone asked. He turned slightly, that same calm grin appearing again. "Some things you don't learn," he said. "You remember." The others exchanged uneasy looks. That night, strange sounds echoed through the halls, low mechanical hums and faint voices like old recordings playing on repeat. The soldiers barely slept. Some swore they saw shadows moving on their own. By morning, tension filled the air. The commander gathered everyone again. His tone was steady, almost too calm. "This place holds the answers," he said. "We've been fighting without understanding what we're truly part of. It's time to see who's been pulling the strings." He walked them to a locked room at the back of the facility. It took 2 men to break the old metal door open. Inside were old screens, machines, and stacks of files. The screens blinked weakly, showing images of soldiers, maps, and symbols none of them recognized. The commander walked to one of the monitors, typed a few commands, and an old video began to play. It showed their entire unit, before they had even met. It showed their missions, their movements, and even moments no one had ever recorded. Gasps filled the room. "Sir, how is this possible?" one of them asked. The commander's face grew serious. "Because we've been watched," he said. "Every move, every decision. Someone designed this war long before we stepped into it." The room went silent. Then, without warning, a voice came from one of the speakers, a cold, mechanical voice that seemed to recognize the commander. "Welcome back," it said. The soldiers froze. The commander didn't react. He simply stared at the screen, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Who are you talking to?" one of the men asked. The commander turned his head slightly, that faint smile curling at his lips again. "An old friend," he said softly. "And maybe our biggest mistake." Those words sent a chill through everyone. They had followed him for months, trusted his plans, his instincts, his strange ability to predict everything before it happened. Now they started to wonder, what if he wasn't predicting anything? What if he already knew because he was part of it all along? The officers exchanged worried looks. The tension was unbearable. Some wanted to confront him, others wanted to trust him just one more time. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered violently. A loud alarm echoed through the base, and the screens lit up one by one, showing maps and coordinates. The mechanical voice spoke again. Protocol resumed. "Mission continuation. Eliminate the rogue unit." The commander's face went pale for the first time. He looked at his people, the same people who had trusted him through everything. "They've found us," he said. "We don't have much time." The soldiers panicked. "Who found us? What's happening?" The commander didn't answer. He grabbed his weapon and said only, "Get ready. The truth isn't done with us yet." As the alarm continued to scream through the dark halls, everyone realized something terrifying. The commander's grin had vanished. The sirens inside the old facility screamed like 100 warning voices at once. Red lights flashed on the cracked walls, throwing strange shadows across the faces of the soldiers. Dust fell from the ceiling as heavy machines started to hum again after years of silence. The air smelled like burnt wires and fear. No one knew what was happening, but they all looked to the human commander, waiting for him to say something, to make sense of it all. He stood still for a few seconds, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the flickering screens that showed moving coordinates and strange patterns. The calm smile that used to be his signature was gone. Instead, his face looked older, heavier, as if the truth he had just revealed was finally weighing on him. "Everyone, listen to me," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've been found. This place isn't just a base, it's a tracker. It was never meant to protect us, it was meant to locate us." The words hit everyone like a punch. Confusion spread through the room. "What do you mean, locate us?" someone shouted over the noise. "Who's tracking us?" The commander looked at the screen again. "The same people who started this war," he said quietly. "The ones who wanted us to fight in the first place." The soldiers stared at him in disbelief. For months they had been fighting for survival, trusting every order, every plan, every word that came from him. Now it sounded as if everything they'd been doing was part of someone else's game. A low rumble shook the floor beneath their feet. Something outside the facility was moving, something big. The soldiers grabbed their weapons instinctively. The commander turned toward the nearest door and said, "Get to the lower level. There's an emergency exit tunnel. Move fast." They didn't ask questions. Training and fear guided them more than logic. They ran down the narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing in the dark. The commander followed last, checking every corner as if he already knew what was coming. When they reached the lower level, they found a long tunnel stretching deep into the ground. Old metal pipes lined the walls, dripping water in slow, steady drops. The light flickered weakly, barely enough to see ahead. The commander motioned for them to keep moving. "Stay quiet," he said. "They're scanning for movement." One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Sir, how do you know all this?" The commander hesitated, then answered, "Because I used to be one of them." The tunnel went silent. Every step stopped. The words echoed like thunder in their ears. "You what?" another soldier asked, his voice shaking. The commander turned to face them. His face was calm again, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Before this war began," he said slowly, "I worked with the group that designed these systems, the ones controlling everything from the shadows. They called it Project Horizon. It was supposed to protect humanity, but they changed it. They started using it to manipulate both sides of the war, feeding information to whoever they wanted to win." He paused, letting the truth sink in. "When I realized what they were doing, I tried to stop it. I tried to destroy their data. That's when they turned against me. I escaped, and since then I've been trying to find a way to end what they started." No one spoke for a long moment. They didn't know whether to trust him or fear him. "So all this time," one soldier said quietly, "you knew what was happening? You knew we were being used?" The commander's voice dropped lower. "I suspected. I didn't want to believe it. But when we reached this facility, I saw the proof." He pointed toward the end of the tunnel. "We can't go back. They'll be here any moment. We keep moving until we reach the valley. There's something there we can use to turn this around." Still shaken, but with no better option, they followed. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The sound of machines grew distant, replaced by the echo of their breathing. Some stumbled, some whispered prayers, but they all kept walking. After what felt like an eternity, a faint light appeared ahead. The tunnel opened into a hidden chamber, filled with strange old equipment and a large metal door at the far end. The commander stepped forward, brushing his hand across a control panel covered in dust. It lit up instantly, recognizing his touch. The soldiers looked at each other. "You still have access?" someone asked. He nodded. "They didn't expect me to come back here." The door began to open with a deep groan. Beyond it was a room glowing with blue light. Machines lined the walls, connected by wires that pulsed faintly like veins in a living body. In the center stood a massive device shaped like a ring, tall enough to reach the ceiling. The commander approached it slowly. "This is the core of the network," he said. "Everything, communication, control, surveillance, it all runs through here. If we shut this down, we can cut them off completely." "Then let's do it," said one of the soldiers eagerly. The commander didn't move. He was staring at the machine with a conflicted expression. "It's not that simple," he said softly. "If we destroy it, we lose everything too. Every record, every name, every trace of the people who've been part of this war. It would wipe out everything, us included." The silence that followed was heavy. So what do we do then? Someone asked. He turned to face them. We find a way to take control instead of destroying it. If we can send one signal, just one message, we can expose the truth to everyone out there. Let them see who's really behind this. The team worked quickly under his direction. They connected wires, restarted old terminals, and powered up the control systems. The commander typed commands faster than anyone could follow. His hands moved with certainty, but his face was full of exhaustion. Outside, distant explosions rumbled through the ground. The enemy, or whatever was coming, was getting closer. "Hurry, sir," shouted one of the soldiers. "They're almost here." "I know," the commander replied, not looking up. "Just a few more seconds." The screens flickered with lines of code. A faint beep sounded. The machine pulsed brighter, flooding the room with blue light. "It's working," he whispered. "We're connected." For a brief moment, hope filled the air. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed again. The screen flashed red. "Unauthorized access detected," a mechanical voice announced. "Countermeasure initiated." The commander's eyes widened. "They're trying to shut us out." He started typing furiously, sweat forming on his forehead. The soldiers backed away as sparks shot from the machines. One of them shouted, "Sir, it's overheating." The commander ignored him. "Keep the power steady. I can still override it." The room shook violently. The machine began to hum louder, the blue light growing brighter until it was almost blinding. The soldiers shielded their eyes, shouting over the noise, then suddenly it stopped. The light vanished. The machine went dark. The only sound was the commander's breathing. Everyone stood still, waiting for something to happen. "Did it work?" someone finally asked. The commander stared at the screen. Then slowly he smiled, not the confident grin from before, but a tired, relieved one. "Yes," he said quietly. "They saw it. The signal went through." A few soldiers exhaled in disbelief. "So, it's over?" Before he could answer, the ground trembled again, harder this time. The entire chamber shuddered and cracks appeared on the walls. The commander turned sharply toward the tunnel. "No," he said. "It's not over yet. They're coming for us." As he spoke, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the tunnel they had come through. Metallic, steady, and far too precise to be human. The soldiers raised their weapons, hearts pounding. The commander looked at them, his expression calm once more. "You've all done enough," he said. "Now it's my turn." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small control device connected to the machine. "If I can hold them off long enough, the system will reset and hide our location. Sir, you can't stay here." One soldier protested. He gave a faint smile, the same one that had started everything. "You'll know what to do next. Just promise me you'll finish this." Before anyone could stop him, he pressed a button on the device. The metal door behind them began to close slowly, cutting him off from the rest of the group. "Commander," they shouted, banging on the door. Through the narrow gap, they saw him turn back toward the dark tunnel where the enemy was approaching. His weapon was ready, his stance steady. Then the door sealed shut with a final clang. The soldiers stood there in silence, tears and anger mixing with disbelief. Outside, they could hear the sounds of battle begin, the echo of gunfire, the roar of explosions. And somewhere in that chaos, the human commander grinned one last time. No one knew what happened after that. But deep down, they all felt the grin wasn't one of arrogance or madness. The door had shut with a sound that none of them would ever forget. A thick metal thud that echoed deep into their bones. Behind that door, their leader, the man they had followed through fire and fear, had stayed behind. His voice was gone, his face lost to the darkness, and only the memory of his last smile remained. For a long moment, no one moved. The soldiers just stood there, staring at the sealed door, each of them hoping that maybe he would come walking back through it any second. But he didn't. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the machine and the faint tremors that shook the walls every few seconds. Somewhere far above them, the world was still at war. Finally, one of the older soldiers took a step forward. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. He wanted us to move. The others hesitated, still frozen in disbelief. Then another voice spoke up. "He said the system will reset. Maybe he bought us time." That small spark of hope was enough to pull them back into motion. They gathered what little they had left, their packs, a few energy cells, and some water, and began to move through the back tunnels. The facility groaned as they went, as if the old metal walls were crying out for the man they had just lost. The tunnels stretched on endlessly. The emergency lights flickered, their glow barely enough to see the path ahead. Dust swirled with every step. The soldiers were exhausted, their eyes red from lack of sleep, but something inside them refused to give up. After hours of walking, they finally saw light again. It wasn't the artificial blue of the machines this time. It was sunlight, real sunlight, streaming down through a crack in the rock. They pushed through it with all their strength until they reached the surface. When they stepped outside, the world looked different. The once burning skies were now painted with pale morning colors. Smoke still rose from the distant battlefield, but the silence around them was strange. There were no gunships, no drones, no sirens, only wind. They stood there for a while, breathing in the open air. It was the first time in months they had seen the sun without fear of being spotted. "Do you think he made it?" one of them asked quietly. No one answered right away. Finally, the older soldier said, "He didn't stay behind to survive. He stayed so we could." The group nodded silently. They knew he was right. As they began walking again, the world around them seemed almost lifeless. They passed burnt trees, fallen towers, and silent machines half buried in the dirt. Nature was slowly reclaiming what had been taken. When they reached a small ridge overlooking the valley, they saw something none of them expected. People. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, gathered in makeshift camps. Civilians, workers, even a few soldiers from the other side of the war. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion. "Are they ours?" someone asked. "I don't think it matters anymore," the older one replied. As they approached the camp, heads turned. The people there looked frightened at first, but when they saw the familiar uniforms, they relaxed slightly. A man from the crowd stepped forward. He looked tired and dirty, but his eyes held something new. Relief. "You got the message too?" he asked. The soldiers exchanged looks. "Message?" The man nodded eagerly. "It came through the network last night. A signal that showed everything. Who caused this war, how they controlled both sides. It spread everywhere. People stopped fighting this morning. It's over." For a moment, no one could speak. The words hung in the air like sunlight after a storm. The younger soldier, the one who had always asked too many questions, whispered, "He did it." The commander actually did it. They all felt it then. Pride, sadness, and something that felt a lot like peace. The man who had led them, the one they had feared and trusted all at once, had truly ended it. Not by winning the war, but by showing everyone the truth. The older soldier took a deep breath and said, "We should help them rebuild." That's what he'd want. And so they did. Days turned into weeks. The soldiers stayed with the survivors, helping to rebuild shelters, fix water systems, and clear the ruins. Slowly, life began to return. People from both sides worked together, sharing stories instead of weapons. Children started playing again where once there had only been smoke. But the memory of the commander never left them. Every night, they'd light a small fire near the edge of the valley and talk about him. About his strange calmness, his impossible decisions, and that mysterious smile that had always appeared right before things changed. "He always knew more than he told us," one of them said one night, staring into the flames. "I used to think he was cold, maybe even crazy, but now, I think he just carried more truth than the rest of us could handle." The others nodded quietly. One evening, as the sun was setting, the younger soldier who had once walked beside the commander sat alone near the ridge. The sky burned orange and the wind carried a faint hum like distant machinery. For a brief second he thought he heard a voice. Calm, steady, familiar. "Keep moving forward." He looked around quickly, but there was no one there. Only the sound of the wind and the rustle of leaves. Still, he smiled. Somehow, deep inside, he knew the commander was watching. Maybe not as a man anymore, but as part of something larger. Months passed, and the world began to change again. The signal that had gone out that night became the foundation of a new era. People called it the truth wave. It spread across cities, countries, and networks, revealing everything that had been hidden. The old governments fell and new ones rose, built not on control but on transparency. The soldiers were often asked to tell their story. They never exaggerated it, never turned it into legend. They told it simply, just as it happened, about a man who once grinned before everything went wrong, and how that same man ended up saving them all. Sometimes they wondered what truly happened to him after the door closed. Did he survive the explosion? Did he get captured? Or did he become part of the system he tried to destroy? No one ever found his body. Years later, when peace had finally settled, a group of workers repairing a communication tower deep in the valley found something strange. Buried beneath the rubble of the old facility was a small black device, half melted but still glowing faintly. When they opened it, they found one last message. It was short, only a few lines, but everyone who read it felt their chest tighten. Truth survives longer than men. If you're reading this, keep it alive. No name was signed, no voice recording, just those words. When the message reached the valley, the surviving soldiers gathered around the campfire once again. The older soldier read the words aloud and silence followed. The younger one finally said, "That's him." "I know it," the others nodded. They didn't need proof. The message carried the same quiet strength that had guided them through everything. From that day on, they made sure his name, though no one ever spoke it aloud, was remembered not as a commander or a hero, but as the one who had dared to show the truth. The valley where the survivors had built their new home slowly became known as Horizon Field. The name wasn't chosen by vote. It just happened. People said it felt right, as if the place itself remembered where the story began. Years later, children played under the rebuilt towers, unaware of the full weight of what had happened there. Their laughter echoed across the hills that had once been scarred by war. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, those who had known the commander would swear they could hear faint mechanical humming in the air, like the distant echo of a machine still watching, still protecting. The younger soldier, now older himself, often stood at the same ridge where they had first seen the valley. He'd close his eyes and remember that last moment. The commander turning back, the grin, the door closing. It no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the start of everything that followed. He whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "You were right. The truth did survive." And somewhere in the vast silence of the rebuilt world, it felt as if the earth itself smiled back. The human commander had grinned once more, not out of arrogance or victory, but because his mission had finally found its purpose. And though